Hello everyone. Good evening. I'm sharing my screen. So let's pick it up from where we have left off in our previous session, guys. So we did create the Hello World SOAP service, and we've also seen how to invoke a JavaScript library from our REST APIs. Okay, so what we noticed is yes, Oracle has given plenty of seeded functions within the mapper to do the required transformations. And apart from those seeded functions, if required, we can quickly write a JavaScript function, and we can also call it from our integrations in OAuth. So we've registered a JavaScript function to concatenate two strings. And we've also seen two different ways to invoke the JavaScript function from within the integration. You can do it as a separate node, or you can do it within the mapper as well. So we'll first see uh, in today's session, we'll first see how to invoke one integration from another one. So I'm going to show you how to invoke a SOAP service from REST API. How do we do it, guys? I'm going to clone the REST API, and I would say invoke integration. Invoke integration. And in this integration, I'm going to show you how to invoke from this integration, we'll see how to invoke another integration. So when you're building integrations in OIC, guys, you need not plug in all the complex logic into one single integration. Okay, that's point number one. So if you're building a really complex integration, you need not plug in everything into single one. Instead, you can break it down into modules or pieces, and you can invoke one integration from another. So in an integration flow, if you need to plug in some logic, okay, say for example, I'm building an integration and I need to send out a notification. Instead of me configuring the notification node, instead of me adding the notification here and spending 20 minutes to configure that notification node, instead what I can do, I can check if any of my colleague has created a common notification service, meaning an integration which takes in inputs like from email address to email address and subject email body as input. And I want to understand if somebody has already created an integration which could take in the inputs required to send a notification, and the service internally is going to send that notification out. In such cases, what do I need to do? I don't need to spend 20 minutes again in my integration configuring the notification node. Instead, I would just call that integration that my friend has created or my colleague has created in a project. So yes, whenever you need to plug in a piece of logic into your integration, it's always better to check if somebody else it could be you or somebody else would have done something similar, or any other integration which could do the exact same thing. And if you already have some integration which would do the same thing that you need to do in your integration means, then there's no point in you spending the effort and time doing the same thing again. Instead, you can just leverage the existing integrations. So for example, in this integration, I'm going to receive first name as input. And what is the expectation? Expectation is that I prefix hello. Okay, expectation is that I prefix hello to the integration. So sorry, to the first name. So instead of me, before I go ahead and prefix this, or before I go ahead and use the concat function and do the transformation here, what is it that I need to ask myself? I need to check if there is any other integration which does the exact same thing. And what is it that you notice? So one of my colleague has created a Hello World SOAP service which would do the exact same stuff. So instead of me plugging in the concatenating hello again to the first name, I can go ahead and call that integration. So what integration? So I can just say that I want to call another integration. I would say call UG63 Hello World REST API or Hello World SOAP service. And in which project it is in? It is in my project, right? And what is the integration that I want to call? I want to call the SOAP service. So I'm just going to pick up the SOAP service, which is another integration that I created. And I'm just picking up greeting operation here. And I'm just picking up greeting operation here. Click on finish. Now, when you call one integration from another, You see here, I'm trying to call a SOAP service from a REST API. So when you call one integration from another integration, first of all, type of integration doesn't matter. So I'm trying to call a SOAP service from a REST API. You can do vice versa as well. And also the style of integration also doesn't matter. You can call a scheduled orchestration from app driven and vice versa as well. Okay, so for now, just bear that in mind. Yes, you can call one integration from another integration. And when you call one integration from another one, nothing matters. You can invoke a SOAP service from a REST API and vice versa. And you can also call app-driven orchestration from scheduled orchestration and vice versa as well. Okay, now we get into the mapper. You see that there is a template parameter called first name here. And remember the Hello World SOAP service, it expects you to pass in first name as input, right? So we map the first name as input. And this SOAP service is going to prefix hello to that first name here. And it's going to give you back hello plus the first name in the response. I'm going to just read that response and send it back as a response from REST API. Here you see the request and you see a response. And from the response, I can just send it back. I can send it back. Okay. So we would go ahead and save the integration. So what is it that we're trying to do, guys, in this integration also? Yes, we are receiving first name, we're prefixing hello and sending it back. But who is doing that concatenation part, guys? We're not doing it explicitly. Instead, we are just making use of another integration created by our colleague, which does basically the same thing. Now, first of all, let's see if that works or not. Then I'll talk about where exactly it would come handy. I'm activating the integration, selecting it as debug. And I can go ahead and run it. I'll pass and say, weeks as input. And I would get back hello, weeks. And if you look at the instance here, first of all, you see the instance created for this API invocation. And within the instance, what is it that you would see, guys? From within this integration, we were calling the Hello World SOAP service as well, right? So how many instances would be created in total, guys? Anybody guess?
2 instances.
Absolutely. So this is a REST API that we are calling. And since we are calling the SOAP service from within the REST API, you would see a separate instance created for it. Okay, so just bear this in mind. So when you invoke one integration from another, you would notice that a separate instance would be created for that one. But yes, we've got the desired result. Now tell me one thing, guys, where exactly this would come handy, guys? You might say, Prasad, it is just prefixing hello, right? Why don't you do it? Why can't you do it manually? So since it is just a prefixing hello, I can also do it manually. But think about a big picture. Or what other possibilities are there? So the fact that you can invoke one integration from another would come handy in few scenarios. First of all, it helps you to build integrations in modular fashion. I don't need to plug in everything into one single integration. Okay. Instead, we need to build integrations in a modular fashion. Okay, so we can build it in pieces and we can invoke them from one integration. And at the same time, you can, if you have, or any integration project you do, guys, there would be some common actions that you might want to perform. So if you build 100 integrations, yes, in all of them, or at least from most of them, you might want to send out a notification out from an integration. So does it make sense to configure a notification in 100 integrations spending 20 minutes each? Okay, so does it make sense to spend in 100 integrations? If you want to send out notification, you need to spend 20 minutes each configuring that node. Okay, so this is one way you can do it. Or what you can do, you can build a one common notification service, spending 20 minutes on it, and call this integration from all other integrations. Wherever required, you can call this integration. Okay. So you have 100 integrations in total, from where we are supposed to send notifications. Instead of we spending 20 minutes each on every integration, we just build one common service spending 20 minutes. And this notification service is going to take inputs required to send a notification. And it's built that way. And you can call this integration from every other integration. So whenever you have a requirement to build common services, we can make use of this. And what's the other scenario where this invoking one integration from another would come handy, guys? The third scenario was when a change in integration style is required. Sometimes what might happen is you might build the integration as app-driven. Sometimes what might happen is you might build the integration as app-driven. You might build the integration as app-driven or a schedule, but you might have a requirement to change the style. You might have to convert app-driven to schedule or from schedule to app-driven. Because yes, requirements do change, right? So when I build an integration, client told me very clearly that Prasad, build an integration, share the endpoint URL with me. And they said they are going to invoke it on demand. They're going to call it or trigger it on demand. And later on, after 2 weeks, after I build the integration, they come back and say, Prasad, can you please schedule it? How do we change the app-driven integration to schedule, guys? Can we change the style of the integration, guys, after we create it? Not possible, right? And that's exactly where this comes into picture. So you can create a scheduled orchestration. So you would have created integration as app-driven. You would create a scheduled orchestration, and from that scheduled orchestration, you're going to call that app-driven orchestration, so that you don't have to recreate the entire logic that you have in app-driven in a scheduled orchestration. So whenever you want to change the style of the integration, you can make use of this. You can make use of this option that you can invoke one integration from another. Since these changes are quite common, as we are facing these issues quite often, so Oracle has given an option to handle this today. So if you create a scheduled orchestration, we have out-of-the-box option to convert it to app-driven, but we still don't have a resolution for this. So say, for example, if you see a scheduled orchestration, let me show you guys. I'll go into design and I'll just pick up any scheduled orchestration. You see the scheduled orchestration? Or let me pick this one up. I just want to pick up something which is in configured state. You see the scheduled orchestration in configured state. So I created this as a scheduled orchestration, and tomorrow client has asked me to change it to app-driven. So what I can do, guys, I can go ahead and replace it with a REST trigger connection. So if it's a scheduled orchestration, I can change it to a REST trigger. That is something that is possible. So meaning if you can change the integration style from schedule to app-driven, this is possible, but not other way around. Okay. So these are the three scenarios where this would come handy, and we've also already seen how to invoke a JavaScript library from integrations. And one last thing that I want to talk about before we move on to the next integration is OAuth. Okay, so how do we use OpenAuth authorization mechanism in OIC? So we'll go back to our integration. Okay, let's go back to our REST API, guys. And I'll go into the REST connection. And earlier, at the moment, the security policy is Open Authorization Token 2.0 or Basic Auth, right? I'm going to change it to Open Authorization Token 2.0, and I'm going to test the connection. Okay, so what does it mean? Yes, it means that whenever I trigger these 4 integrations, I have to pass in authorization details in a OpenAuth using OAuth tokens. Okay, so let me go ahead and save this. And whatever integrations are there where this connection is used, they will be reactivated. They will be deactivated and reactivated. So that this change takes effect. Now, what would happen after the integrations are reactivated? After the integrations are reactivated, what is it that you are supposed to do? Yes, we will go ahead and pick up one integration, guys. So I'm going to save this. And I'm going to pick up this REST API. So let's see what REST APIs we have. We have the actual one. Okay, so we take this REST API. And for this REST API, we would go ahead and pick up the endpoint details. And this is a REST API that we need to call. Now to call this REST API, I can call the REST API, passing in the first name, and I'm going to pass in James as input. And in what format I have to pass in authorization details, guys? If I send in a basic auth, would it work, guys? Yes or no, please?
It will not work.
It will not work, right? But let's give it a try. So I'm sharing my screen back. So let me go ahead and test this. But since the authentication mechanism, so since we are passing in authentication details as basic auth, which is not matching with what we mentioned in the trigger connection, which is OAuth, it's error invalid. Now, how do we fix this? One way to fix this is we need to get a OAuth token. And how does open authorization token for authentication works, guys? I've prepared this document, and I'm going to upload it to the Google Drive folder. So this is how the OAuth credentials work. Okay, so the first thing that we do is, remember there is an Oracle, there is a IDCS application in OCI, Identity Domain Cloud Service. And in the Identity Domain Cloud Service, what we're going to do is, we need to register a client. We need to register a client. Okay, so we need to register a client application. We need to register a client application in IDCS. And when you register a client application, what would happen, guys? First of all, you register a client application entering the client ID and a client secret here. And with this, so we would create a client application. We would register it in IDCS. And when we register it, we get a client ID and a client secret. And what we do is in this client application, so first of all, you register a client here. In IDCS, you get a client ID and a client secret. And with that ID and secret, you're going to register a client application. And that client application is going to access a token endpoint. Remember, the IDCS application would have a URL, guys. To that URL, we just need to add token at the end. I'll show you how to get this token endpoint. And to this token endpoint, we would be sending out a request, passing in the client ID and the client secret. And what is it that we're going to get back? We're going to get back an access token. We're going to get back an access token. So so when you register a client, you get a client ID and a client secret, and you share it with a client. And client, from whatever application they have, since we don't have client, we will use Postman as an application here. We would hit the token endpoint using client ID and a client secret. So we get back a token, and we use that token to validate it. So we would send that token as an authentication when we call that REST API. And the moment I pass in the access token, so the OIC server will internally talk to the IDCS, and it would validate whether it is a valid token or not. And if it is a valid token, what is going to happen, guys? So it's going to let the integration be triggered. So it's like instead of using passing in the username and password, we would be passing in an access token for validation purposes. Now, one important point, guys, you see this client registration in IDCS is something that is already done. See, the OAuth configuration comes in automatically comes automatically in a OIC instances nowadays. Earlier, we used to do this client registration explicitly, but we don't have to do it anymore. So where do we see this information, guys? First of all, if you go to cloud.oracle.com, and I'm going to log into the application now. For this one, you don't need to do a hands-on, guys, but I'll just show you. I'm going to log into the IDCS application as a administrator. And the moment we log in, we can go into IDCS. identity and security, IDCS. And we need to go to users here. That would take you to identity domain cloud service. So this is identity domain cloud service. And what we need to do is, first of all, there are three things that we need from here. So the first thing is we need to go to Oracle Cloud Services. And in Oracle Cloud Services, we need to search for our OIC instance. So this is our OIC instance, you know, the external OIC. This is our OIC instance, get into it. And within the OIC instance, you would see that OAuth configuration comes by default, guys. OAuth configuration comes by default, meaning Oracle internally registers the client within IDCS automatically. And that configuration is what we are seeing here. That configuration is what we are seeing here. So what we need to do is we would have to, there are three things that we need from here. So we need to get the primary audience from here. And we need to get the scope. We need to get the scope. And we need to get these two IDs first of all. So this is a client ID and a client secret. Remember, Oracle has already registered a client in IDCS, and this is a client ID and a client secret for that particular client, which is registered. So I can copy this ID. So this is going to be my client ID. And what's the client secret, guys? You can go ahead and show it. Copy the client secret, and I can paste it in. Okay, so this is my client ID, and this is my client secret. Okay, and what else we need, guys? So as per this diagram, what is it that we need from our client application, meaning Postman or any other tool? We need to hit the token endpoint, passing in the client ID and the client secret to get a token. First of all, guys, you don't even have to do this process, guys. You don't even have to do this process. So if you see here, so if you go into OCI, you would already be able to see a process here. So you will already be able to see a token available here. So do you see something called as an access token, guys? So you go to access token, and I can mention that, yes, I need a token to invoke other APIs. And I would go ahead and select this particular resource. So the resource would basically control what all you can invoke in that OIC instance. So if you say all, that means you can invoke any of the resources that we have in the OIC instance. So I can select this. And the moment I select this, I have an option to download a token from here. So meaning this client application internally sends in a client ID using the client ID and a client secret. It's going to talk to IDCS and generate a token now, the moment I click on download token. And what I can do, you can see that the client, the token is downloaded, right? So I can go in here and I can just go ahead and open the token with a text editor. I can open the token with a text editor. And here you see that there is a token here, right? So there's a token here. Now all I have to do is just copy this particular token. Just copy this particular token. Remember, the token is generated by using this client ID and a client secret. So whatever was the OAuth configuration, which is already done, I'm just downloading a token. And if I pass on this token to the third party, what they can do is they can select OAuth 2.0 and they can just pass in this token and fire off a request. That's going to give us back a request. So, but what is it that I'm sharing here with a third party, guys, over the client? We're just sharing the OAuth token. We're not sharing the username and a password of OIC instance here. Okay, so you can either directly share the token and setting in the expiry date to a pretty long period. This is one option. Or what is another option? You can also share this. You can also share this client ID and a secret with a client application, with a client team, and also share them to token endpoint URL, so that instead of we sharing the token, whenever they want to call it, they would hit the token endpoint, pass in the ID and secret, and they would get a token themselves and they would send it with a request. So instead of we sharing the token directly with them, we can also share them ID and a secret so that they can hit the IDCS URL, get the token, and send it with a request. Now, how can they also generate a token, guys? So they need this, we need client ID and a secret. We have them, right? And we need the token endpoint URL. How do you get the token endpoint URL, guys? So to get the token endpoint URL, what you need to do is you need to go into IDCS. So for example, if you see here, so let me just duplicate this. If you go to IDCS here, so you go into identity domains, you see this is a domain that we have. And within the domain, remember, I'm in a IDCS domain. So I can copy this, I can show this and domain URL, I can copy this, and I can paste it in here. I can paste it in here. So this is a domain URL. To this domain URL, what I need to do is, I need to prefix this URL. I need to say to this link, remember 443 is something that you can exclude because it is always HTTPS connection. We don't need 443. So you enter the IDCS URL OAuth 2 v1 token. So this is a URL that we need to use. And these are the two details that we need to use to to generate the token. Let's see how to do it, guys. I'm going to copy this. And you go into Postman tool. I can create a new request. And I'm going to call this as a post request. I can use this particular, I can hit this token endpoint URL. And in the authorization detail, I need to pass in this username and password. So this client ID and client secret is what I need to pass as a username and a password, hitting the token endpoint URL. So what is it that I'm doing now, guys? From a client application or from a Postman tool, I'm trying to hit the token endpoint using the ID and the secret to get the token. Okay. And after when you hit the IDCS endpoint, so the token endpoint using the client ID and a client secret, guys, remember along with this, we also need to pass in few additional details here in the body. In the body, we need to pass in few additional details. What are those details that we need to pass in, guys? So the first thing that we need to pass in is, we need to, when we hit the endpoint URL, we pass in basic auth, the username and password as basic auth. And what else do we need to do? We need to, in the body, we need to pass in a key as the RAN type, and we need to pass in client credentials on it. And we need to pass in a scope. And in the scope, we need to mention in the scope, what is it that we need to mention, guys? Whatever is the primary audience that you see here, whatever is the primary audience that you see here. So this primary audience plus the scope. So you need to use these two together as a scope here, primary audience plus the scope. And you say grant type equal to client credentials. So when you say client credentials, because in the authorization, I'm passing in client ID and a secret. So when you generate the OAuth token, you can use the grant type as client credentials, and that would give you a token. And you can also just copy that token and use it to invoke the endpoint. But when I do it this way, I'm facing an issue, guys. Not really sure if there is a problem with the IDCS or OAuth configuration. So if I'm just saying, let me give it a try today, client credentials. When I'm passing this as client credentials, and I need to select the scope, as the primary info. Sorry, I will take the primary audience here. And to that primary audience, we need to attach the scope. So if you say, if you use this particular scope, guys, this is going to give you access to the entire PaaS instance. But if you want to invoke only the OIC REST APIs, but not give access to, give privilege to access the other resources in a PaaS scope, then you can directly use this or only use this particular scope. So this is what we need to use. So I just have to paste in that URL. You just have to concatenate them together. And you need to go ahead and fire off a request. And when you fire off a request, what's happening, guys? You see that you've got back an access token. Now, ideally, this access token should also help you. This access token should also help you to trigger the REST API. Now, let me copy this. I go back to the GET request. Remember, this was a token that I have used earlier. So I'm going to take this off. Remember, this was a token that's generated in OIC itself. I'm going to paste in this URL and I fire off a request. For some reason, I'm getting this forbidden request or forbidden status things. Ideally, if you generate a token this way using entering the client ID, client secret, hitting the IDCS URL, passing in the body as client credentials of the grant type and the scope, appropriate scope, primary audience and the scope. Let's try out the scope, guys. Just give it one more try. See if it makes any difference. We've got another token here. Let me just give it a try. Not really sure if it makes any difference. We would copy this and we would go ahead and pass it as a request in this get endpoint. Now we're getting it as unauthorized now. Yeah. So it's sending you, giving you a different error. Not really sure. So ideally, the only thing that we need to do was, so here you see the grant type, guys. There are multiple ways in which you can pass in the grant here. So first, the scope. Let me change the scope back to the original one, guys. Back to this one. And this is what we usually do, guys. We ask the client to use the grant type as client credentials, and we share the primary audience plus the scope, and we share the client ID and a client ID and a client secret. So these are the two things that we share. The endpoint URL. Remember, we are not sharing OIC username password anywhere. We get a token, and this is a token they would be using to access our REST API, guys, and it would work absolutely fine. Looks like there is some problem in this IDCS configuration or OIC. But as we have seen just now, if you make use of a default token that's generated here, it is going through fine. Okay. And ideally, you should not face this issue in real time. And what's another way to generate a token, guys? One way is you can just say client credentials, or another way is you can say the grant type as password, and you can say username, and you say UGOIC.user1, and you can pass in password as well. I mean, this is like passing in the OIC username and password to generate a token. So this way also you can generate tokens, guys. When you generate OAuth token with a client ID and secret, internally for authentication purpose, I can pass in username and password, or I can just say client credentials here. So let me paste in this password, guys, here. Well, let me get that password. I've got that password here, and I'm going to paste that in here, and I will generate a token now. Now I see that I could see that there's a token generated, and I'm going to take this off. Now I would copy this token again, and you go to this get endpoint, and in the tokens here, you paste this in, whatever is the token that was generated. So the client has generated a token by passing in the client ID and a secret. But since the client credentials grant type was not working, I was using username and password. Now you would see that you've got back the option here. So this token also went through successfully, but only when I generate a token using the grant type as client credentials here instead of password, because we don't, using password doesn't make sense, guys, because we need to share the username and password with the client, which is what we want, which is what we were trying to avoid in first place. So ideally, client would be using the word called client underscore credentials here, and they don't pass in these two. they would still get a token, and that token would be working to access the REST APIs. Okay, so this way is what we can do, guys. Instead of sharing the username and password, we can make use of OAuth tokens to authenticate ourselves. So I also checked if I also checked if the appropriate grant types are enabled here. So you could see that the client credentials are also enabled here, but still it is not working. So what this is enabled means is, meaning I can use a grant type as client credentials to generate the token here that we have seen. Yes, I think since the client credentials is enabled, it is giving us a token, but that token is not letting me invoke the integration. Okay, but you should not face that issue in real time. So this is how OAuth authentication mechanism works, guys. Instead of you sharing a username and password with a client, you would register an application in IDCS. You don't have to do it explicitly. With OIC instance, it comes by default. You can just copy that ID and a secret, and you pass it on to them. And you share the endpoint URL as well. And what is client going to do, guys? What is client going to do? Client is going to trigger this IDCS endpoint URL, passing in the client ID and a secret as input. And they would be passing in the grant type as client credentials with the scope. So they get a token and they trigger it. Okay. Any questions, guys, from anyone? Any questions from anyone?
Yeah, Prasad, I'm Anjan here. So
Yes,
instead of creating this, can client access, like once he click on that integration, he will get the mobile authentication and he can enable that so that he can log in. Is it not the proper way to access it?
I didn't understand what you're saying.
No, once he.
So okay, first of all, no. Are you talking about the token generation, or are you talking about invoking the REST API?
Token generation. Instead of generating the token and give, once we click on send the run button in the Postman tool, so can't he get the mobile notification so that he can access it and open it, trigger the integration?
I'm not particularly sure if that is feasible or not. Okay, so these are typically done as two separate steps, like generating a token first and passing this as input. So when you do this within the integration, guys, of course, you would call this as a REST API first, get the token, and that token you're going to pass as input to the other integration when you call it. Okay, yes, Vishal.
This token integration, as you said, it has a validity, correct? But during that validity time, it will remain same. So
correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
3600 seconds is by default the expiration token. So you see here 3600 seconds, right? So meaning roughly 1 hour, the token would remain same. And within 1 hour, you can make use of a token. And you can also increase it if you want. You can also increase it if you want. Okay, so if you don't want to always, if you don't want the other person to keep generating a token first and then sending it, you can also generate this token and send it out as a one-off case. And that would work.
Okay. And Prasad, second question. In the first example today, when you called this REST integration from the SOAP integration.
No, other way around I did, but it also works.
Yeah, REST to SOAP. Yeah, from REST you called SOAP. In SOAP, correct, we have to pass that credential and everything. But when you called within the OIC, you did not pass any parameter.
It internally
like
works it out. Internally it works it out. So depending on when I
called from Postman, then I have to pass those credentials. How it will work?
Now two things here. When you call an integration, how you pass in authentication details would be determined by the security policy here. And when you call from an integration, I can invoke any number of integrations here. I can call an ERP connection. I can call any other connection. Each connection has its own security policy. So when you call, first of all, you're calling a SOAP service here, right? So this expects you to pass in username password token as input. So OIC has a capability to generate the token and pass it as input to it. It happens internally. And if you call another integration, if I call say ERP cloud connection, And in that connection itself, I would have plugged in the authentication mechanism. I would have plugged in the username and password. Say, for example, if I'm importing journals, I use ERP connection, I say import journals. I would have mentioned in the connection what is the username and password that it needs to use, which instance it needs to connect to, where it should import the journals. So in the connection, you mention the details. If it is a connection that you are invoking, and since it is another integration that you are invoking, internally the OIC instance would pass in the credentials.
Okay. So if you have called this integration, correct? Say hello, which was, I think, which was a REST integration. So if
this is, yeah, when I call this integration, what do I need to pass in? I have to pass in the OAuth token itself, right? Because it depends on this one. So forget about this one. So what happens internally in the integration, this authentication is completely different from this. This is what we are focusing on now. And this part, internally, it would be taken care of by Oracle. And if you're calling another connection, you would be plugging in the details there.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys?
Prasad, Ravikant.
Please go
So
on.
basically, in real time, every time we will be calling basically two services, like one which will be
if it is a OAuth token, then you would have to first call this to get the token, and then you pass it as input to call the actual service.
Okay.
Yes. Otherwise, what you can do? You can just increase this token validity to a pretty long period, maybe like 30 days or something like it. I'm not sure what's the maximum limit that we can set here. So you can set it to a maximum limit, and you can share the token so that client doesn't have to regenerate it every time.
Yeah, but so in that case, maintenance will be there, right? Someone will have to again change.
Sorry, in that case, what is it that you said?
Means maintenance is required, right? Because
maintenance
if it is
required.
Expire, then, yeah.
Yeah, of course. See, the maintenance part would come into picture anyways, right? So, do you think we don't share the? Don't you think we change the passwords or our credentials? We do it in ERP, and we also rotate the keys in OIC instance as well. You're logging in with a user, right? So, do you think the password would remain same forever? You rotate the keys every 3 months, right? You rotate the password. So, in a similar fashion, this also you can rotate. So if I can see here, so this is if I convert this into number of hours, I could see that there are almost 170 hours as what it is turning out to be. But I'm not sure what is the maximum limit, but you can set it to a maximum limit and you can send it across.
Okay.
These are the two different ways. Any other questions, guys, from anyone? Okay. Now I could see that 3 or 4 folks are missing today's session, guys. So is it okay if we start off with the next integration tomorrow, guys? Because even if I start off with it, I would only be able to set the context. Let's do it tomorrow. Because other folks, if they miss the initial discussion, they won't be able to follow what we are doing in the integration. Well, let's pick it up tomorrow. Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow.